Hello and welcome to Voices for the Voiceless. Today I am joined by Dan Jarvis, British Divers Marine Life Rescue's Director of Welfare and Conservation. Good morning.
Good morning. Good to see you.
Good to see you. We have so much to discuss, so much ground to cover this morning. I wanted to start, if you could please take me back to the 1988 virus epidemic that started it all.
Yeah, of course. It's where it all began for our charity. So there'd been nothing like this before. There was an epidemic called phocine distemper virus amongst seals. It originated in the Baltic and spread across Northern Europe, eventually ending up here in the UK as well. And there were large numbers of seal casualties coming up in all states of sort of poor health, deteriorating health. And there was really only the RSPCA and a small field hospital in Norfolk that were really able to deal with this, but quite quickly were overwhelmed, of course, with the volume of casualties.
Yeah.
So this group of divers came together and started going out with the RSPCA to help recover animals off of the beaches and transport them in for care, and even using their dive boat to get to some of the offshore sandbanks where they were to recover them from out there too. So that's where it all began and sort of transformed us into what we are now.
You are, if I'm right in saying, are you the only charity in the whole of the UK that is doing something like this?
Essentially, yes. There are other groups out there, of course. So seal rehabilitation centres, some of their staff go out, and the RSPCA staff and SSPCA for Scotland as well. But UK-wide, we are the only charity covering the entire country in terms of marine mammal emergency response.
No pressure. No pressure. I mean, over 4,000 call-outs last year. That is just a sign of the times for the state of our oceans. I wanted to touch on a couple of situations that are going on, campaigns that you guys are running, one of which was the flying rings that you did with the Seal Alliance campaign, which I read it and I thought, really? But I guess, yeah, a lot of people are just having a good time at the beach and don't really think about the ramifications of leaving any litter behind.
Yeah, absolutely. It does sound bizarre. I mean, most entangled seals and other wildlife that we encounter is usually, unfortunately, fishing-related gear. But oddly, frisbee flying rings are suddenly becoming quite a popular item to find, particularly seals getting entangled in. Particularly East Anglia, there seems to be a lot of cases over there, but it's been spreading in the last few years. So we've had cases here in the southwestern Wales, up in Scotland. We're hearing of cases in the Netherlands as well. So, yeah, it's something that seems to be a growing problem, and it's a relatively new one that's really just been going for maybe 5 or 6 years or so now. But the volume of frisbee rings that are being picked up by beach cleaners on a regular basis is just ridiculous. It's, dozens and dozens and dozens of them being picked up from beaches that I know of just here on my local patch in Cornwall in the past year or two.
I guess people don't think of it. They're just sort of having fun, and there's got to be a solution. Surely you could somehow make them not be dangerous for seals.
Exactly, yeah. The whole Seal Alliance campaign around the flying rings it's sort of twofold, really. One is to encourage consumers not to buy them in the first place and to use alternatives like solid discs instead, so nothing can get entangled in there. But we appreciate, of course, it's still plastic, so if it's still lost in the environment, it's still pollution and it's a problem. So again, also encouraging potentially the use of biodegradable alternative materials to be used for them as well, which are available, but unfortunately just very limited in where you can get them from. But the other part is sort of tackling the problem at the source. So talking to retailers who are selling them, making them aware of the issues that it is causing. And there's been really great success amongst the volunteer network from the Seal Alliance coalition of groups who have been proactively going out and speaking to other major retailers as well. And many of them have actually been quite agreeable once they've understood what the problem is to taking them off of the shelves and not restocking them anymore, which is fantastic. And then on top of that, some councils are actually also banning them from use on their land and beaches.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's hopeful. I think that's going to be a huge part of cleaning up our beaches and our seas, going to the manufacturers, going to the fishermen, because obviously, as you said, one of the biggest causes ghost nets bycatch. I would love to hear more about that and how fishermen are preventing all of the bycatch that's going on at the moment.
Yeah, it's a problem that affects all of us. We always often talk about it from our terms and our experience in that it's affecting wildlife, but it's affecting people going about their daily business out on the water as well. It can entangle around propellers, it can damage gear and so on. So,
Wow.
it's a common interest that we all have to remove pollution from the environment. And fishermen are part of the solution. We need to recognise that as well. And there are some really great schemes, like there's one called Fishing for Litter, where there are sort of skips or receptacles at harbour sides. So fishers that are bringing in gear that they've accidentally caught at sea in the course of their work, they can bring it ashore and dispose of it. And they don't get lumped with the cost of the disposal of the ghost gear then, which is fantastic. It's a funded project. So to see that really rolled out on a much more large scale and having a lot of support and a lot of encouragement for the fishers doing their bit as well, it really is quite important.
Yeah, they're leaning into AI now, aren't they? I was reading about it. There's a lot of smart trawl AI systems, which is crazy, but this is the kind of technology we need to prevent bycatch. I mean, the pictures you see and the numbers of bycatch is just heartbreaking.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is still a major issue, bycatch in fishing gear or ghost gear and so on. And there are other organisations working particularly on the bycatch thing. There's a government scheme called Clean Catch, which again is sort of picking experts out from across a number of different fields, including fisheries scientists, fishing organisation representatives, and conservation representatives for different species to sort of come together under one forum, sort of one umbrella, and sort of work together on the solutions across all of those taxa, which is a very good idea because it brings it all into one discussion forum then, rather than the seabird people being over there and having their own discussions and the marine
Yeah.
mammal people being somewhere else. And they're all having separate discussions, which probably end up having very similar themes and the same things being talked about. So hopefully that process is sort of streamlining the effort to find solutions together.
Fingers crossed. Is there any way that someone who does eat seafood can not support these ghost nets? Are there any sustainable fishing options that they can choose?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of really good apps that are out there that can be downloaded. The main one is the Marine Conservation Society.
Oh, I love them. Yes.
Yeah, they have an app, the Good Seafood Guide, which you can look at and you can see all the different kinds of species like tuna, salmon, and so on, and look at the different sources. So you can look when you're in the supermarket at the product that you're buying, look at the label, see if it's sustainably sourced and how it was caught. So sort of rod and line, for instance, is more sustainable than nets. And it gives you ratings for each of those species and the types of fishery that it's come from, and even the population it's come from as well. So yeah, I definitely recommend looking at that, and that way you can be more directed if you are eating seafood about which is the most sustainable that you can buy.
Fantastic. Well, that's good news. I must say, when I was looking into all of this, it felt rather morbid looking at all the statistics, but knowing that there are companies that have been really proactive and obviously MCS doing all of that wonderful app development, that gives some hope. Another thing that the oceans are struggling with, oil spills. My goodness. I wanted to touch on the event that happened in the Shetlands, and a quarter of the local seal population is just heartbreaking statistic.
Yeah, again, it was back in the early years of BDMLR, 1993, an incident in a remote part of the country with limited resources. So again, this team of divers that originally started the charity, they went up there again with their boat to get to some of the inaccessible areas and other islands and start recovering casualties, working alongside Hillswick Seal Sanctuary up there, who were taking in casualties and rehabilitating, and of course the Scottish SPCA as well. Yeah, devastating for wildlife, but again, the beginnings of some really great relationships and efforts to recover wildlife as well. And then again, similar in 1996 with the Sea Empress at Milford Haven in southwest Wales, a very similar sort of situation. lots of seabird casualties as well, of course, as well as seals. But again, some good collaborative working to recover wildlife casualties.
There you go. There's a silver lining. See, that's the thing about animal lovers, animal people. We all come together to support each other when times are tough and an animal needs our help. We really do. We're good at rallying round. How do you even go about rescuing an animal from an oil spill?
Yeah, tricky one. So generally speaking, when an oil spill occurs, there'll be quite a lot of organisations involved. So there'll be the Coast Guard, there'll be Environment Agency, Marine Management Organisation. It will become quite a complex operation,
I'm sure.
especially for major incidents, of course, which I'm largely referring to here. So yeah, it's really important for there to be really good communication, and sort of within that structure, um, there will be sort of like an environmental / wildlife section that's looking at the cleanup and the wildlife casualty aspect of it. So that would be, again, a bit of a collaboration between local organisations, national ones like the RSPCA, ourselves potentially being involved there to provide certain resources. And for us at BDMLR, we have around 3,500 volunteers in our network. So one of our key assets is that we can provide manpower to have people on the beaches to help pick up casualties, but also to transport them. And then on top of that, we'd have the management structure that would be organising those volunteers, maybe having a field triage centre, and then designated centres that these animals would be being taken to as well. So there'll be all the complicated logistics being worked out there.
And how does an oil spill even happen? And we're talking about, for the Shetlands, 85,000 tons of oil. How does that even happen?
Yeah, the numbers are really unimaginable, aren't they? It's difficult to sort of understand what the scale of it is when you just see the numbers, and sometimes maybe better illustrated by sort of aerial photos to see the scale. Luckily, in this day and age, maritime safety and regulations are improving all of the time. It's been a while since we've had major pollution incidents. I think probably one of the last ones was, I think probably one of the last really major ones was in 2000 and I think it was 2006 or 2007, the MSC Napoli in Dorset, which there was a ship incident there with some pollution and some containers that washed ashore as well. But there have been sort of small scale incidents that do pop up from time to time as well. So, for instance, the recent accident in the North Sea off the Yorkshire coast a few months ago, earlier this year, when the two ships ran into each other. Again, there was a lot of discussion and alert about potential pollution from that, which thankfully didn't actually materialise. But there was a lot of urgent discussion when that incident happened, if there was going to be a major oil pollution or chemical pollution on the coast.
I like this communication. That's really good. I like that there's urgency and that people are trying not to replicate the events that happen in the Shetlands, all these events. I know that storms can be quite, maybe not for the oil tankers, but I know they upset a lot of marine mammals if there's like a serious storm.
Yeah, that's actually one of the biggest reasons why the volume of call-outs that we receive on our hotline is increasing in recent years. Again, that in itself is a bit of a complex picture with a few different aspects to it, but climate change and the increase in severe storms over the past 10 years to 10 towards 15 years now is becoming really noticeable. And for myself, in the far southwest of Cornwall,
I'm sure.
And I've been
Get your head
sort of
blown
involved.
off.
Yeah, been involved for doing this since 2002. From my sort of first-hand only personal experience, I can see that the winters are changing. We are getting more of these severe storms and they are having a bigger impact. And when they come in during the autumn and the winter, it coincides with the grey seal pupping season as well. So if you get a really big storm at the wrong time, it can be completely devastating to the population. And we get the collective, we ourselves, BDMLR, the RSPCA, the Cornish Seal Sanctuary, the rehabilitation centres, we are very quickly overwhelmed with the volume of casualties. The number of pens available in seal hospitals is very finite, and the resources available to deal with them also finite too. So that's when things get very difficult for us, trying to find spaces for a lot of pups in a very short amount of time during these incidents. And those are just the ones that survive. Of course, there'll be a large mortality associated with these incidents as well. So if I give an example of 2017, when we had one of the really major sort of extreme cases, shall I say. It was in October of 2017, there was two major storms within a week of each other. There was Storm Brian, followed by ex-Hurricane Ophelia that came in. But Storm Brian in particular came in on the peak of some of the biggest spring high tides of the year as well. So as well as there being massive storm waves, the beaches were completely inundated by the storm surge and the high tides, the big spring tides as well. And there were places like Skoma in southwest Wales, which recorded a loss of over 70% of pups overnight, and similar in the Isle of
No.
Man, and presumably similar for the rest of southwest England and parts of the south and west of Ireland that are really exposed to these dangerous conditions. And what's really sad is that there's examples of that are happening more regularly now. We don't really have much from before 2017, but then we're starting to get these extreme events happening maybe on a bit more of a regular basis. So again, Storm Arwen, which came in a few years later from the north and affected the east coast of Scotland and northeast England. We saw similar things there where there were huge amounts of casualties. It came during November, which is the peak for pupping up around there, right at the end of November. And I know in particular St Abbs in sort of the Lothians borders area of southeast Scotland, they lost over 800 pups overnight from that major pupping area. So what we're seeing on the front line is these major events which are leading to population level mortality incidents. So we're identifying this new threat to grey seals, and it is coming about as a result of climate change. And this is where us being out there and collecting data alongside us, the animals that need our help, is really important, because these case studies then lead on to calls for change, calls for campaigns, evidence that we can put to policymakers and towards sort of the statutory bodies and other scientists to investigate and raise the alarm, help us raise the alarm about what's going on out there.
And do you think that's been quite successful? Because, I mean, 800 lives lost that's a really terrible statistic. Do you feel like that in legislation changes? Has there been some regulations? Or, I mean, climate change is this huge monster that we're all facing globally, but little changes, I think, is how we're going to make the difference.
Yeah, it sort of seems to be that way. There's some small changes happening, but the big changes seem to happen very, very slowly, and a lot of pressure needs to be put on, and a lot of evidence needs to be gathered as well to sort of prove the point. And we understand climate change is in itself somehow a controversial issue, even though there's plenty of science to give
Oh,
the
it's
basis
happening.
that it is happening. Without the science, can see it firsthand
Yeah,
happening
look
out
out your
there.
window.
Just look out the window. Some of it is half the battle is just convincing people it's actually a thing, and it's affecting us in all sorts of different ways. It's not just the wildlife, it's affecting people's livelihoods too. And I think the more that we have these incidents, the more that people start to realize that something's going on. And there does seem to be more focus when extreme weather events start to happen. And it's not just through storms, it's through extreme temperatures, whether it's extreme cold or extreme heat. We're getting all these wildfires that we never used to have a few years ago.
Yeah.
There's a lot more flooding, and the flooding is more severe, and it's happening all over the world. And I think that's the bigger picture thing here is just, aside from look out the window and see what's happening on your own patch, is look at what's happening around the world and see how frequently record fires or record flooding and record rainfall is occurring. It's because the environment and the sort of the weather patterns are becoming more unstable. So we're flicking between these two extremes of extreme dry, extreme wet, extreme heat, extreme cold. It's all symptomatic of a destabilizing environment, and that's quite scary.
That is absolutely terrifying. And our oceans are warming. Does that affect the seals? I know that whale stranding, is that part of warmer waters as well?
There's certainly a lot of redistribution of species going on, and that's being recorded across lots of different taxa, from even very small things like starfish and crabs all the way up to the marine mammals, which already are quite well-travelled creatures anyway. And that, for us, speaking from the BDMLR perspective, is quite interesting, because we're starting to see more species from warmer waters coming up to the UK. So for example, if I choose common dolphins, which for us here in southwest England are very, very abundant in large numbers. But if you go back sort of 15, 20 years, they were actually pretty uncommon in Scotland, up in the far north of the UK.
Fascinating.
But these days, they are now much more frequently recorded. And in more recent years, we're starting to get more reports of them in the Eastern English Channel and in the North Sea, where we didn't used to have many reports of them at all. So they're redistributing. And we're aware that there's redistribution of harbour porpoises in the North Sea and the types of habitats and areas that they are using as well. And similar for seals. And again, you can kind of see that in our data for the seals, particularly in the southeast of England. So we look at our data region by region, and if we look at sort of the Thames estuary and southeast England, so from Sussex up to Essex, if you go back a few years, those regions used to get not very many calls at all about seals, but now they are getting much busier, and we think that again is a symptom of redistribution, and we're getting a lot more calls about common seals in the summer coming into the Thames estuary in Kent, and we're getting grey seals creeping around into the English Channel around Sussex as well. And so so there is a lot going on out there. It can be really hard to keep up with everything that's going on. There's a lot more change going on than we probably realise or understand even at this point in time. And there's a lot of scientists out there doing a lot of good research, trying to record all of this. And I think the important thing is in all of this is people coming into sort of learning about the marine environment and marine conservation is this thing about shifting baselines. So what was normal for me 20, 30 years ago is now abnormal, whereas people coming into it now will think, oh, this is normal. And then 20 years later, they'll be thinking, well, now it's totally different from what it was like when I first started 20 years ago or so.
Yeah.
So for me, then that'll be 50 years time difference. And so that, understanding that baseline and the shift is also really important as well, I think. So, just to record that speed of change and where things started originally, or not necessarily originally, but at a certain point where we've got really good data to show that change. Yeah, that's just really important to help keep providing that evidence as to what's going on.
And these poor animals as well, do they get lost in tidal changes and not being able to use their echolocation? Because obviously these are completely new areas for them.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it is quite mixed news when it comes to the climate change thing. Some of the animals are having to find new habitats because of the change in where food can be found. So one of the really interesting ones in recent years actually is humpback whales. In the past 5-6 years or so, they are starting to turn up around the UK in numbers and are staying regularly.
Crazy.
So again, speaking from my own local patch here in the southwest, humpback whale sighting would happen maybe once every few years down here. Whereas since 2020, suddenly we're getting several animals turning up mainly in winter. They're staying for potentially a few weeks, some of them, or even a few months. And they're spending a lot of time feeding. And there's other species coming in. There's lots of common dolphins. There's fin whales also coming in at that time through the winter. There's the tuna as well, which have also sort of suddenly reappeared in the last 5 years. And it might be that the populations are increasing, which is a good news story. But it might be that they're here because they've lost a food source somewhere else and it's shifted, or that there's overexploitation of food and they're having to be pushed harder to find out where it is.
Overfishing
As well. So, yeah, that might be a little bit of an element of it as well. So it's a very mixed picture on that front.
So when these lovely whales are coming in, do you get whale beaching or whale stranding as the phenomenon as it's better known?
Yeah, it's changing things for us in a few ways. I say largely with seals, actually, it's most notable. But when we do get more animals around the coast, chances are higher then, of course, as it would naturally seem through probability, that some of those animals coming into these areas might already be debilitated for one reason or another. So, for example, when we get large influxes of common dolphins at certain times, then naturally we'll start to potentially see more call-outs regarding common dolphins, for instance. And when we come to the big whales, it's not necessarily strandings, but the increased risk of entanglement in fishing gear.
Of course.
Or mooring buoys, that sort of thing. So that is an issue, particularly for minke whales and humpback whales. And if we're getting an increase in humpback whales, then it stands to reason, the probability of them getting entangled increases. So we might be having to deal with more of those type incidents as well. So that's something that we're, thinking forward, we're sort of having to prepare ourselves to have the resources and the funding to potentially deal with an increase in those types of incidents in the future.
How on earth do you untangle a whale in the ocean?
With great difficulty.
I'm sure.
But we're very fortunate in BDMLR. We have a specialist trained large whale disentanglement team, and they originally trained many years ago at the Centre for Coastal Studies over in the USA. And those guys are, some of the best in the world. And we did some intensive training over there with them. They've been over here to train some more of the team as well. And we've now got a very active large whale disentanglement team with members based around the whole country, but largely in Scotland, where the majority of these incidents currently happen as well. So we were able to respond and go out onto the water with some really specialist equipment and try to deal with those animals using some very specialist techniques as well. So it is very risky, make no secret of that. It's one of the most dangerous forms of animal rescue in the world. And people, very, very experienced people in other countries have been killed in the course of doing these operations. So it's not something we ever take lightly.
Oh my goodness.
Whenever we get a call about one of these. So yeah, that's why it's really important for us to have some really highly skilled people with the right kit to go out there and do these things.
What are the chances of survival for a whale tangled?
It varies hugely. It depends largely on how badly entangled they are and how long they've been entangled for. Generally, the longer that they've been entangled, the worse it is, because if they are free swimming still, then they will be struggling to feed, struggling to move. The weight of the gear will be causing drag, making them use more energy. Therefore, they have more of an energy deficit and therefore losing weight and condition. And if they're struggling to feed at the same time, then as well, they might not be getting enough nutrition either. So some of the more medium to long term entanglements will be in quite poor condition already and not have a good prognosis. However, for animals that have been more recently entangled and might only have minimal impact and minimal injury, hopefully, as well, they might stand a much better chance of surviving if they can be cut free of the gear.
Is that the same for seals? Are their survival rates slightly higher if they're recently tangled?
Yeah, again, sooner is better to try rescuing them. The effects of damage and other impacts will be more limited then. But it also depends on size as well. And we particularly note this with seals, that younger animals that might still be able to forage fairly successfully and therefore still growing quite quickly will usually end up with bigger impacts from entangling material, although that's not always strictly the case. But we are aware from research done by the Seal Research Trust from their photo ID work that there are animals out there, adult seals that are out there that have been entangled for years and yet seem somehow to be coping with their entanglement. And in most of those cases, it's just a very small piece of net, sometimes even just a single loop of monofilament net that's around their neck. And therefore, as they're not really growing anymore, the effect and the damage is much more limited. However, it's a different story if there's trailing material underneath them. And that's where the really horrible problems start to occur, because as the animal hauls out on land and it starts to move around and the trailing material keeps getting caught under them and caught on their flippers, it's horrible as it sounds. It's like decapitation in slow motion is what's happening. The net will gradually be soaring through the neck and it causes horrible, horrible injuries to them. And some of the worst that we've dealt with have been cut down to the bone, and you can sort of feel and see the vertebra sticking out through the injuries that they have. So it'll be incredibly painful for them, and it'll be slowing them down. It will be affecting them in everything that they do, every movement that they make, and it's absolutely horrendous.
And this could be going on for years. They could have started out as a little pup, grown up with this monofilament around their neck, and that would have just been their life.
Yeah, essentially. Probably our best case study of this is a seal that we rescued a few years ago. And she was known from the Seal Research Trust photo ID work. She'd originally been identified in 2018, I think it was, off the top of my head. And she was already entangled then and thought to be a juvenile. So we actually came across her in some quite difficult circumstances. She'd been found in a fairly remote area, not a seal haul out area by any means, just wedged between some rocks, low down below the coast path down towards Land's End in the far west of Cornwall. Quite weak. And it was a miracle in the first place that someone spotted her. We managed to get our team down there. And she was really wedged in between the rocks. It was like she'd sort of been lifted or maybe left behind by the tide,
Oh,
and just
yeah.
ended up sort of in this hole. And there was just her front half of her body and head sticking out from this hole, which she was completely wedged in. And the medics that were down there, they were sort of using a few different techniques and they could not unwedge her from there. So we actually called the Coast Guard out to come and help to see, thinking they might have had some equipment to raise the boulders apart or have some other types of gear to try and lift from. And during this time, the tide was coming in as well, and she was below the high water mark. So it really was a race against time, and literally with minutes probably to spare before she would have been submerged. And probably actually with a little bit of help from the tide, maybe forcing up some pressure underneath her as well. But we did actually manage to get her free. So we brought her in for rehabilitation. And when we first sort of were dealing with her at the point of rescue, we sort of assumed that she'd be a year old or so. She didn't look like a much older seal, and she was incredibly bony and underweight, horribly malnourished as well. So we sent the photos into the Seal Research Trust. So we were all completely shocked when they came back and said, yeah, we believe this seal is perhaps 5 to 6 years old. But we were looking at it thinking this is a 1-year-old seal from the proportions and the size of the animal. And now, sadly, she didn't survive. We called her Hattie.
Oh.
She didn't survive. We had her in for 9 days with us, but blood testing showed that she had some major organ dysfunction that wouldn't enable her to survive long term, fortunately. So we had to make a decision to put her to sleep, and her health was, she'd slightly improved in that time, but then she'd started to decline again after a few days. So we made a decision to put her to sleep, and we had her off for a post-mortem with Cornwall Marine Pathology team as well. And when we opened her up, her liver was massively enlarged. It was about a third of her body weight and filled most of the sort of the chest abdominal cavity area with the rest of the organs. And there was evidence of past and present hemorrhage as well in the organ. There was scarring over it. So she'd had some internal injury that she'd also managed to survive as well. But the liver itself was extremely pliable. You could sort of pick it up and it would just fall between your fingers. It was quite horrible. And it was a condition identified as amyloidosis. It's a deficiency in the production of sort of proteins in the cells that had sort of destabilized the structure of the liver is one of the signs of it. But it was causing other internal issues for this seal as well. And we think from the entanglement, the chronic entanglement, it had led to her being stunted in growth. That was why she was so small in her appearance. So amyloidosis has never really been recorded in seals before, certainly not on this scale. We published a paper on this in the end because it was such an important case study in one of the scientific journals by the vet pathologist who led the investigation. So again, it was much like the climate change thing that I was talking about earlier on. It's such an important case study to show the impact of a small amount of monofilament net, really, really tiny amount of monofilament net stuck around this seal for years, led to it going through all of that pain and suffering. It was a horrible, horrible, heartbreaking case that we had to deal with there.
But that death was not in vain because you researched it, you publicized it, you recorded it. So she didn't suffer for nothing. Now you have these records, you have this liver dysfunction, you know why it was caused. And that hopefully will then guide regulations, legislation moving forward.
Yes.
So at least, your organizations like yours, they're not letting these deaths just be pointless. Obviously these are beings and we love them. And even though they're not humans, they're still absolutely vital. There's steps for that, rescuing seals and other species as well.
When it comes to seals, the very large majority of what we deal with are very young animals in the first few days or weeks of their life, and they're struggling for all sorts of different reasons. It could be early separation from the mum, which might be natural, but it might be also due to human disturbance, which is another major issue that we have. It could be that they have various kinds of infections, respiratory problems, eye ulcers. They could be severely malnourished for other reasons as well. They might have various different kinds of wounds. It might be bites from other seals. It could be bites from dogs. It could be storm-related damage. Entanglement, of course, we've already talked about. So yeah, there's loads of different things that we can try and assess. So generally speaking, when we get a call about a seal, we'll send a couple of our volunteers out. We'll do a visual assessment first. So we can look at things like the breathing rate and breathing pattern. We can look at the body shape to get an idea of nutritional condition, any obvious injuries, or maybe signs of eye infections, and so on. So we can get some early data on the animal. And then based on that first initial assessment, if we've got a cause for concern about the animal's health, we'll then move on to a second stage, which is hands-on physical assessment. So that's where you'll see us restraining them with a towel, covering over the head and keeping the jaw shut. And we can do a much more in-depth close-up examination then to check all of the flippers in more detail. We can look in the mouth, we can check injuries more closely, and we can weigh the animal as well. And again, based on all of that information we've collected, we can put all of that together to get a picture of the animal's overall health and how it's doing alongside its sort of behavior and demeanor, and come to a decision on what's the best option to do for it in terms of welfare, which sometimes might be that actually it's not as bad as we first thought, and we can just let it go again, which is great. We can just mark them up and let them go again and let them go about their business. For those that aren't doing so well, of course, we have the option of rehabilitation. So we work with lots of different rehabilitation centres around the UK to bring them in for care.
And that your custom built Cornwall Seal Hospital, how is that going? Are you busy?
Yeah, right now we've got 4 seals in our hospital. We've been running that now, in its current form at least, since 2020. When we sort of conceptualized the idea, and then we built it over the following year. So we have been doing short-term seal holding in Cornwall since around 2009, when we started to get a little bit busier, and then it really ramped up sort of through 2013, 14 onwards as we started to get more of those weather events that we mentioned earlier on, and just generally a lot more people around the coast as well. There's a lot more year-round tourism, so that's also increased the volume of calls and disturbance issues.
I'm sure, yeah.
So that was the need for us to start doing short-term holding, and for a long time we had an outbuilding of vet surgery in southeast Cornwall, and we kind of outgrew that and needed to move on, and that's where the Cornwall BDMLR Seal Hospital came from. So we've now got a facility with 10 pens in there. We've got an amazing team of volunteers led by myself and our head vet consultant, Natalie. We have a part-time vet that works there, and we're also able to facilitate training for other volunteers as well from around the UK to come in and get some hands-on time with seals in controlled conditions. So it gives them more experience and more confidence to go out and take those skills with them to their own areas as well, which is great.
Of course, the Marine Mammal Medic course, that is such a good idea. It's so exciting. How would someone get involved in this?
So we run the training course in various locations throughout the year, through most of the year from spring to autumn. So we've actually just about finished our courses for the year now. Winter's not such a good time for doing outdoorsy stuff all day in terms of training. So the course is made up in sort of 2 parts. There's online lectures that get sent to you in advance, and they cover how our call-out system works, a lot of the health and safety that's involved throughout. And then there'll be separate lectures on biology and species identification. There'll be another one on seal health assessment, first aid, and the decision-making process. And then a same one again for the cetaceans, the whales, dolphins, and porpoises. And then once you've done all of that, there's in-person training day with instructors out on the beach all day, where we'll have a life-size seal pup, dolphin, and pilot whale models. They're filled with water, so they're a lifelike weight, and we'll employ what they've learned from those online lectures. So practicing the first aid, practicing the health assessment. We'll do some knowledge testing as well. And then using some of those specialist techniques. So in particular, how to catch a seal safely with a towel, how we might refloat a dolphin with a simple tarpaulin, up to refloating a medium-sized whale with our specialist whale reflotation pontoon system. And then after that, you join our team. You get your certificate and join our response groups around the country, and essentially just wait for the next call to come in. And if you're available, go out and respond. So that's kind of how it works.
So can anyone apply?
Essentially, yeah, as long as they're aged over 18, just for our insurance purposes, and yeah, anyone from any background can get involved. You don't have to be a diver. You don't even have to be able to swim, because the very large majority of what we do is actually land-based, with seals that are hauled out on beaches, or dolphins and whales that have life stranded and are also on the beach. The only time we really go in the water is if we have a whale or a dolphin or a porpoise that we want to refloat. But even then, most of the time, we're just staying within our depth, sort of between waist to chest deep water. Occasionally, we might be taking them out a bit further on a boat, but that really will be about it. So it is really for pretty much anybody to get involved in if they're keen to do some hands-on, really cool stuff with marine mammals and in their best welfare interests. Then, yeah, we're here for you.
Would you advise if someone sees a seal in distress or a beached marine mammal, maybe don't approach it and try and intervene if they haven't done this wonderful course?
Yeah, best advice that we can give people is if they do come across for a seal in distress, just to give it a wide berth, keep other people away, keep dogs under control and on a lead. That's the most important stuff. It's really important to remember seals haul out to rest. They're more efficient at digesting food. They're conserving energy as well. So they have chosen to be there. And sometimes people don't always understand that they can do that. They think they might be a bit more like a dolphin and have to be in the water. So they try to sort of chase or herd them down, or even pick them up and take them into the sea themselves.
Oh,
Which
bless.
please don't do that. Don't do that. They are there to rest. That's the main reason that they are there. So actually, by putting them back in the water or chasing them back into the water, they're wasting energy. They're getting more exhausted, and it actually might be pushing them more from life towards death if they are really struggling as well. So that's our best advice. We can provide advice over the phone. I mean, technology is great these days. We can get pictures direct from callers on the beach and videos as well, so we can get pretty rapid assessments, or at least initial ideas of assessments on animals, so we can see which ones might need urgent help and which ones actually kind of look okay and might just need to be left alone. But when it comes to the live stranded cetaceans, again, there's like a natural sort of reaction just to get it back in the water and chuck it back in as soon as possible. But again, it's understanding the reason why that animal is there in the first place. And stranding can be a symptom of very poor health. And that's a really important thing to understand. Sometimes they are stranding because they are no longer coping at being in the sea. We do get animals that strand because they're healthy and it's some other reason. It could be that they have come into an unfamiliar habitat, like, for example, common dolphins entering rivers and estuaries. They're not familiar with intertidal areas and mudflats, and they can get caught out, but they'll otherwise be healthy. Or it could be noise-related issues as well. So military activity, for example, has been known to cause strandings too. And then,
Of
again, in
course.
those situations, they'll essentially be healthy animals. So again, getting people to understand that from the outset, that putting it back in the water, particularly if it's a really unhealthy animal, it's very likely to just restrand. It's going to be quite stressed, it's quite debilitated and exhausted, and it's highly likely that it's just going to get washed up again. So best thing is to call us. Again, we can provide the advice on the right things to do over the phone. We can mobilize our team urgently, we can get vets involved, and we can make a full assessment of the animal and decide what the best outcome for it is in that situation.
Other than picking up the phone, how else can people help your fantastic organisation?
Well, like we mentioned earlier, the Flying Rings campaign, we've been trying to raise awareness of. So anything like that you see on social media. So we have information about disturbance, preventing disturbance, and best practice wildlife watching that we often promote as well. So you can look up codes of conduct for wildlife watching. We'd really encourage that as well to minimize our impact on the wildlife too. As well as that, I mean, as a charity, we are entirely self-funded. A good deal of what we run on comes from our training course fees, but also from uh, getting sponsorships, getting public donations. Sometimes we have particular causes, like, for example, at SEAL hospitals, that sort of thing. So any support that can help keep us going in that respect is always hugely appreciated. As we all know, we're in a cost of living crisis, and the same applies for charities. Our bills have gone up quite hugely in the last few years, with not just from the simple cost of things, but through the increase in the number of casualties that we're dealing with as well. So the extra vet bills that we're getting as a result of that, the additional care costs that we have in seal units, like the seal hospital in Cornwall here, for example. That's, it's all going up and up and up and up, and we need to be able to keep pace to keep us going. Otherwise, we couldn't carry on doing what we do.
Absolutely. And all your fantastic volunteers, the Marine Mammal Medical Course. When's your next training session then? Will it be sometime 2026?
We've got one last session, I think, coming up in a week or two in Kent. That's our last public training course of the year. Then we'll have a break through the winter because we get absolutely inundated with the grey seals. Then it's our busiest time of year, pretty much from now right the way through to February, March sort of time. And so then March onwards will be when we start organising our first courses for 2026. So if you go onto our website, there's more information on the training course there. You can sign up to a waiting list and you'll get notifications on when the next courses in the region are organised as well. So you can keep an eye on it that way.
One last question before we go. If someone wants to have a really compassionate coastal holiday, they don't want to harm any wildlife, but they might want to see them, what are the steps that they should take?
Do your research, find out what wildlife's likely to be in the area. And we're not just talking marine mammals here, we're talking things like seabirds as well, which are also hugely, hugely vulnerable to human disturbance. The impacts can be really severe on them, particularly when they're nesting as well. So do look up those all-important best practice codes of conduct for wildlife watching. Learn about the area that you're visiting or that you live in as well. See if there are any sensitive areas that you can research online. Some of those places might have quite specific guidelines for them. So some places might have sort of like ropes around cliff tops to keep you from leaning over too much and looking at seals hauled out on the beach below, because they will notice you and are likely to stampede in the sea. So think things like that. It's just be very aware of your environment. And if you are out, say like on a paddleboard, a kayak or something, and you're just going around the coast, just be aware the next corner you come around could be a seabird nesting ledge, or there could be a seal haul out beach. And if you can see them from a distance, just be very aware of your surroundings. And if you do see them, then just maintain your distance. I mean, generally the best practice points that we promote are keep 100 meters distance from wildlife, stay quiet, and keep time of your visit to a minimum, so that we're not hanging around and potentially causing stress as they're worrying about what you're doing if they've spotted you for a long time as well. But otherwise, the best wildlife experiences are the ones when they don't know that you're there and you get to see them doing all their natural behaviours instead of just staring at you and getting stressed. So that's definitely the best wildlife watching type experiences, I would say. So if you get that chance, just enjoy it while you've got the moment.
Yeah, enjoy them from afar. Brilliant. Well, Dan, thank you so much for talking to me today. I will definitely be keeping an eye on the 2026 Marine Mammal Medic course. You may be seeing me struggling on the beach.
And that would be great to see you on a course soon, hopefully. Thank you very much.